Well, good evening, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? That's pretty good. It's getting better. It's getting better. My name is Anthony. If I haven't met you yet, I'm the pastor of this service. I'm really excited to be with you all tonight as we are in this series, Explore God, as Annie was saying. Each week, over the course of 7 weeks, we're looking at a big question about either faith or God or Christianity. And so last week, if you were here, Steve Coble, he tackled the question, does life have a purpose? And tonight, I'm going to try to tackle the very simple and easy question, is there a God? So we'll see how this goes. This question's been asked for a very, very long time, but I'm hoping to provide the final answer tonight that you'll know 100% for sure, one way or the other, by the end of our time in this next 30 minutes or so. Just kidding. But before we jump into the question, is there a God? Let's think about first, what's the current consensus? Do people think broadly in 2019 that there's evidence for a God, or that there's evidence saying that there is no God? And it really depends on where you look. In the West, in the United States specifically, and in places like Europe, atheism is on the rise. Each generation has a bigger percentage of the people are atheists than the generations prior. So it seems like in that way that belief in God is decreasing. But if you look at the rest of the world, especially the countries in what's called the global South or the global East, you actually see that Christianity in particular is really increasing. It's actually ballooning in how big it is. And so I can't really speak with much authority on why that is in those other places of the world, but we can maybe look at first, why is it that in the United States, perhaps atheism is on the rise? Because we all live in the United States, I'm pretty sure, unless you're just in here for the weekend or something. But basically, I think one potential reason that atheism is on the rise and more religious beliefs are declining is because of this idea called the God of the gaps. Now, maybe you're not familiar with this. I was not familiar with this either, but it's basically the idea that as science and progress increases, belief in God decreases. I was texting with my friend Steven the other day. He considers himself an agnostic atheist, and so he explained it this way, and I asked him, I was like, can I share this? This is the most concise way that I've heard it explained. And so he said this. He said yes, that was the answer to that question. We'll put it up there. Just that for all of human history, humans have explained unexplained phenomena with the concept of God. And then once those things are explained by science, we don't explain them with God anymore. And God gets smaller and smaller the more we discover. Now, he didn't finish his thought, but obviously if the scientific progress continues, eventually God gets so small that he doesn't even exist at all anymore. And so who is this bad news for? This is bad news for anybody who places their faith or their confidence in something ancient, either an ancient text or an ancient event that happened. Because if you look backwards in time and say, I'm basing my beliefs on something from a long time ago, then something a long time ago obviously didn't have all the benefits of science and progress. And maybe the reason that the people were writing the way that they did was because they had gaps in their knowledge. Maybe that's why when people first looked around and they saw lightning bolts, they're like, maybe there's an angry man throwing the lightning bolts at the earth. And then we realized actually it's this complex weather system that causes lightning. And so in that instance, we took out that thing we once attributed to God, and then we said it's actually something we can discern in science. So this is bad news for the Christians, it's bad news for the Muslims, it's bad news for the Hindus, it's bad news for the Jews. But I actually want to look at that. I want to challenge that just a little bit and actually look at one of the ancient perspectives. Now, you are in a church, and I am a pastor, so I can really only speak from the Christian perspective with any amount of authority. And so we're going to look at an ancient perspective from the Bible, and then we're going to bring it all the way to 2019. And we're going to say, does this still hold up? Or was the person way back then writing it, were they just writing it because they had gaps in their knowledge? And now science and progress have filled in those gaps. So first we're going to look at the ancient perspective. But at any point tonight, if you have questions or concerns or things that you want further clarified, I want this to feel like it's more of a dialogue, so you can actually text in your questions. The way that you do that is you type in your phone the number 62953, and then do Ask NN. That'll make sure that it goes to someone at Park and not some other place. And then you do your question. So it's up there on the screen. Anytime tonight, if you have any questions, feel free to send them in. I'm going to answer them with one other person at the end of the night, as many as we can in the time that we've got. All right, so let's first look at this ancient perspective. This is found in the book of Psalms, which is in the Christian Bible, and the author is the guy named David. And maybe you've heard of David if you've ever heard of the idea of David and Goliath. Maybe you didn't even know that that was based on a story. Maybe you just thought it was like a sports metaphor or a business metaphor. Or maybe you heard about the secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. This is the same David from that song. Same one. All right, so I'm going to read this and we're going to see what David has to say. Remember, this is pre-science. This is a long time ago. This is an ancient biblical perspective. Let's see what he has to say. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard. Yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun. Now, first, when you first hear that, maybe you're thinking, whoa, he's got some big gaps. He's thinking the sky is talking and the universe is talking to each other every day. Not so fast. If you've even taken like a freshman level English course, I'm saying like freshman in high school, this is poetic language. He's using metaphor. He's personifying nature, basically saying that if you look all around you, it seems like the creation around you reveals a creator. He's like, look at the amazing universe that surrounds us, and it seems like it's so amazing that it couldn't have just appeared on its own. It must have had a creator. So creation reveals a creator. So that's the ancient biblical perspective. But maybe you're like, I don't really do well with poems. That doesn't really do much for me. Can you give it to me a different way? Picture this. I'm guessing that all of you in this room are probably on one or more of the social media platforms out there. Who here has an Instagram? That's most of you. That's good. So on Instagram, if you've been following, there's been some big news these last couple weeks. The number one liked photo on Instagram was this picture of Kylie Jenner's baby Stormi. And it came in with a whopping 19 million likes. Sorry, just under 19 million likes, 18.6. Now this held the record for a long time until it was passed up by a picture that was perhaps much more profound, a much deeper, lasting thing that we're going to be talking about for years and years to come. 18.6 million likes was passed up by this egg with a whopping 50 million likes. 50 million likes on this egg. The person who made this post, we actually don't know who they are. It's completely anonymous. They call their followers the Egg Gang, and if you have liked the egg, you are part of the hashtag Egg Gang. But basically the craziest thing about this is that it's completely anonymous. And we all see this and we laugh, and then people reacted to it. Kylie Jenner actually posted a video of her smashing an egg on a really hot concrete to be like, take that egg, but she still has like less than half of the amount of likes as the egg. And then this was a funny article that I saw from Business Insider. The American Egg Board celebrates an egg becoming the most liked photo on Instagram and getting, in quotes, the recognition it deserves. Now, I really would love to know, what is it like a day in the life of someone who works for the American Egg Board? What do you think they do all day? I'm going to find out, and I'll come back with an answer after I've looked into this. So this is an anonymous post. 50 million people interact with it. There's a thought that it's maybe someone from London, but nobody really knows for sure. And this is how much of actually internet content works in general. The whole idea of memes, if you're all familiar with a meme, memes is they're pictures with the text, and then they have like a format and they change over time. And most of them are completely anonymous. They get uploaded, they get shared and shared and shared. We all laugh at them. And basically we never really know who made the memes, but we still enjoy them. Now with the egg and with the memes, you never think in your mind that nobody made the posts. That somewhere out there in the network of Ethernet cables and fiber optic cables that connect America and Europe at the bottom of the ocean, that they sort of just spontaneously generated this golden egg that garnered so many of our likes, or that they spit out memes just for our entertainment on their own, that nobody is behind it. And why is that? Because when you look at the content, you think that there's probably someone behind it. And I'll put it like this. Where there's content, there's a content creator. Where there's content, there's a content creator. And now this is exactly what David thought. David looked around and he's like, this doesn't look just like random chaos. This actually looks like content. And where there's content, there's a content creator. And so he says this, I'll put it up on the screen for you. He gives 2 reasons David believes that it's content and not chaos. The first reason is that it's complex, and the second reason is that it's caused. Isn't that nice that BuzzFeed made the article just for us, just for tonight? No one even noticed. That's okay. That went a little bit over your heads. That's fine. So David's looking around, and he's like, there's a lot of evidence to think that this is content and not just chaos. And his 2 reasons are that it's complex and that it's caused. So we're going to look at each of them. So the first one is complex. Remember, this is the ancient biblical perspective. No modern science, no astronomy, nothing like that. Here's what he says. The heavens proclaim the glory of God. Heavens meaning like the stars in the sky. When he's looking up, and it's probably a clear night sky because there's no light pollution from Chicago, and so he can really see a lot of these stars. And he's like, wow, that really proclaims the glory of God. The skies display his craftsmanship. Now probably you can picture the sunrises and the sunsets and all the cloud formations. He's like, it's just amazing. Day after day they continue to speak. Night after night they make him known. Remember, this is personification. They speak without a sound or word. Their voice is never heard, yet their message has gone throughout the earth and their words to all the world. Despite the lack of modern science and astronomy, maybe they had horoscopes back then, I don't know. But he doesn't have any of that, and he's looking around and he's like, man, this is really complex. Look at the complexity of everything above us. This probably points to that it's not just random chaos, but it's actually probably content. And where there's content, there's a content creator. So that's his first argument. His second argument is that it's caused, meaning that it has an origin. He looked around him and he was like, I don't think that this has been here for forever. I think that it actually started. Something made it start. It had an origin. And so this is what he says. God has made a home in the heavens for the sun. So a couple things to notice that back then a lot of people thought that the sun itself was a god and that it was eternally existing. But not for David. He's like, nope, I think actually the sun started. It had an origin. And he attributes that origin to God, that God placed it. But not only did he place it in the sky, that he also created the home for it. Meaning, and remember, this is metaphoric language, but he created all the space around that the stars and earth and planets all that live in. And this is very in line with what we find in another book of the Bible. The first book of the Bible actually is called Genesis. And it's another ancient biblical perspective is this. In Genesis, the first verse of the Bible, very first sentence. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. 2 things to know. In the beginning implies that there was a beginning, that it was not eternal, that it actually had started at one point. And the second thing to note is that it says God created the heavens and the earth. He again attributes the cause, what caused it is God. And so both David and Genesis, both of them, they're like, it's not eternal. It had a beginning, it had an origin. It was caused to exist. And so that's basically the ancient perspective that we find in the Bible, specifically. Those 2 things. David looks around, he's like, this is probably not just random chaos. It's probably content. Why? Because it's incredibly complex, just like a lot of the memes out there. And it seems like it had an origin. Somebody must have made it initially, just like the egg. And so where there's content, there's a content creator. All right, so how does this hold up in 2019? We're going to zoom ahead a couple thousand years and bring it to today. Has modern science, has it fought against that? Were those assumptions that David and the writer of Psalms had, were those just based on because they had gaps in their knowledge? Or does it actually seem like science has increased the likelihood that both those things are true? We're going to look at them both right now together. So right now in 2019, is the world, the universe, everything that we see, is it more complex or less complex than when David looked up? Obviously, it was probably the same, but I'm saying from their perception. From David's perception of how insane the sky was, how large the universe is, has that increased or decreased with time? And actually, I could explain to you how big the universe is and how long it takes to get to everything and try to just tell you about the scale, but it's actually, I think, better if you actually see it. So just turn your attention to the screen. This is a video about the scale, the size of the universe. I don't know about you, but when it starts zooming back in, my stomach like literally drops because I'm like, it's insane. The universe is insanely big. It's huge. It's literally so much bigger than David could have possibly imagined. You can actually download an app version of that, and it's called Cosmic Eye. And I cut off the video because it doesn't really pertain to what we're talking about, but it basically then zooms in inward. It goes all the way inside of the human body and then down to the cellular level, the molecular level, the quantum level. And there's like just as much craziness getting smaller as there is getting bigger. And so in 2019, science seems like it's confirming David's argument. David's saying, look at how complex it is. And here we are in 2019, and it's infinitely more complex than David could have possibly imagined. And so where there's content, there's a content creator. Now, the second reason that David said, he believed that the world and the universe had an origin, that something caused it to be in existence. What does that look like in 2019? Now, I just want to say up front, for all of you out there who are actually good at science, I'm going to probably butcher some of this. I may use the wrong words. I tried to do as much research as I could to understand this, but I was an English major in college, so we didn't take many science classes at Northeastern Illinois University. But basically, this is what people thought. People thought for a really long time that the universe was eternal, that it had always existed until the last 100 years or so. And in the last 100 years or so, there were some big discoveries, mainly by this guy named Edwin Hubble, and he was like part of the Hubble telescope. And so what scientists figured out is when they looked way out into the universe, when they saw the galaxies and the stars way, way, way out there, what they noticed was that they were all moving away from each other, that they were extending out into the universe. And that's what they talk about, the universe expanding. And so these smart scientists, they thought, well, if the universe is expanding, maybe we could trace back where they all started. That maybe if they all are shooting out in every direction, that actually you could trace it all back, and maybe they all began with one point. And this is actually what they found. This was the discovery that they called the Big Bang Theory. Now, the Big Bang Theory, the scientific idea, not the TV show. And the Big Bang Theory, it's kind of unfortunate. If you Google Big Bang Theory, the TV show comes up before the origin of our universe theory. I'll let you decide like which is more important, which Google should maybe put above the other one. But either way, so the Big Bang Theory is that you could trace them all back to one point, one starting point. And maybe you're like, I've already heard that. I understand about the Big Bang Theory. Maybe you haven't looked into it enough though, because the craziest part about it is not that they all started in one point and then spread out in every direction. The craziest part about it is how fast that happened. There was a scientist, his name's Alan Guth, and he's a really smart guy. And he's in an interview, and he's basically saying, okay, so the universe started, actually you can go back one. The universe started with a single, you can go back one slide if you can, Gabe, thanks. The universe started with a single gram of mass. A single gram of mass. So the entire universe spread out in all directions from a single gram of mass. I know we're in America, we don't use the metric system, unfortunately, so you're like, what is a gram? How big is that? A single gram of mass is 1 M&M. An M&M was the starting size of our entire universe. 1 M&M. And then what happened? The M&M started to double in size. So it went from 1 M&M, now it's as big as 2 M&Ms, now it's as big as 4 M&Ms, now it's as big as 8 M&Ms. And that happened 100 times. Now you might think, okay, if I double 1 M&M 100 times, that's not going to make it as big as the whole universe. Do it on your calculator. It will blow your mind. How big that number is, 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, all the way 100 times, it will literally blow your mind how big it gets. And so it starts with 1 M&M, and then it begins to double in size. And here's what Guth says about it. He's in an interview with a guy named Robert Kuhn. The doubling time was about 10 to the negative 37 seconds. Decimal point, 36 zeros, 1 at the very end. An unbelievably short length of time. And so the guy says back, so if you have 100 of these doublings, it takes 10 to the negative 35 seconds. So in this period of time, the whole universe, as we know it, was created. And Guth says, essentially, that's right. When you think about going from the size of 1 M&M to a universe big enough to fit everything that we just saw in that video, you would think it would take pretty long. Not the case, says Guth. He's saying, and in case you don't really even know what that means, how to even think about 10 to the negative 30 seconds, I'll put this next slide up for you. That is a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of 1 second. I was hoping there'd be like a gasp, or like a, oh. Have you ever seen 36 zeros written out in a row? Probably not. A trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second is really, really short. It's really short. Sometimes people say that happened in half a second. This is a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. It's essentially instantaneous. And this is saying that the universe, not only was it caused to exist, did it cause to become what it is today, it happened essentially instantly. And so this is actually where atheists and Christians both agree on something. We both agree that something caused the Big Bang. We just disagree about what caused it. Now, I don't know if this name means anything to you, but there's a very well-known atheist. His name is Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins, he's a really well-known author. He's a molecular biologist, evolutionary biologist. Very smart guy, and he actually does not really like Christians. He wrote a pretty famous book called The God Delusion. You can read in what that's probably saying. And so Richard Dawkins was in an interview, and he's basically talking about the interviewer is asking him, okay, well, what started this? What caused that? What caused that? What caused that? And he's moving his way up the chain. And so eventually he gets back and he says, well, what caused the universe to exist? And he says, well, the Big Bang did. And then the guy asks him, all right, well, what caused the Big Bang? And so in that moment, he's kind of just theorizing about what are potential things that could have started this insane process going from the M&M to the whole size of the universe. And this is his response. It could be that at some earlier time somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility, and I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that. If you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology, you might find a signature of some sort of designer. Richard Dawkins looks at this and he's like, this is so crazy how this started. Something had to have started it. And he's not willing to say that it's God, but he is willing to say aliens. That at some point an alien race evolved in their own universe maybe, and then potentially created our universe. And then because the genome is so detailed and so insanely complex, that he's like, you could probably find the stamp of that alien race in there. Now, Christians, we say that God created it and that all humans have the stamp or the imprint of God in them. That's what you hear about Christians saying, that we are made in the image of God. So the beliefs are really not that different. And mainly, we are both on the same page that something or someone caused the universe to exist. That's basically what science says right now. And so if you go back to the ancient perspective, if you go back to what David said so long ago, it seems like this actually strengthens his argument. That he was saying, okay, something causes to exist, and he had no knowledge of like all the science that we've done in the last 400 or 500 years. He had no idea about any of it. Yet it seems like with time, both parts of his argument, that it's in fact content and not just chaos, are proven by science. Now, if you are here and you already consider yourself a Christian, I hope that hearing this encourages you. Because my guess is at some point in the last 5 to 10 years, you have probably felt under attack for your beliefs. That other people, somebody maybe from school or someone on the internet, was basically saying, how can you be a Christian and still consider yourself to be an intelligent, functioning adult? It is mind-blowing for you to have these beliefs in a God that created the world and still try to claim that you're an intelligent person who cares about science or cares about math or cares about anything. I'm hoping that you're seeing now that they're not actually two competing forces. And that for a long time, scientists in general, that they were studying, their science flowed out of a desire to learn how their creator God created and sustains the world. That science in many ways only was able to exist because people believed there is a God who created this and has made it uniform enough for us to study it and to learn about it. If you're here and you are an atheist, or maybe you're like, I don't believe any of this. And maybe you hear these types of arguments and you're like, this is unconvincing. This does not convince me at all. I've heard a lot of this already and it just doesn't do it for me. First of all, I just want to say thank you for even being willing to step into this space. I obviously feel you probably are not super comfortable coming into a church and hearing this, but I just want to say thank you for even giving the opportunity to hear a potential response to the question, is there a God, from a religious or Christian perspective. I would encourage you to keep looking into this because there are a lot of other arguments out there. We really only had time to talk about this one, but there's tons of other arguments out there for the existence of a God. And I would just say it's too big of a question to just leave alone. So keep looking into this. But really, if you are here and you are one of those people who believes in a God, maybe you didn't before, but maybe you slowly are stepping over that line to think, okay, maybe there is a God. Maybe something created all this. Maybe it's because of what you've learned about how creation started and how the universe started and all that, or maybe it's a different reason. But maybe you find yourself in that category where you're like, I think that there is a God. If this is you, you are on the verge, in my opinion, from experiencing an incredible life transformation. Christians, this is what we believe. We believe that the God who created the world, he did not just stay above it and away from it, that he didn't just set it in motion, but that he has actually revealed himself to us. And mainly his main way of revealing himself so we can find out what is this God actually like. Because if there is a God and you believe that a God exists, but you don't know anything about them, then it's not really any different for your life than if you were an atheist, if you believe that there was no God. And so we believe that this God has revealed himself as an actual person. 2,000 years ago, an actual person lived on this planet named Jesus. And historians of both Christians and non-Christians, nobody disputes that Jesus was a real person and that he was crucified by the Romans. The biggest debate comes with the second part of that. His followers believed, and this is also it's universally found to be true, that everyone knows that this is true. His followers believed that he came back to life, that he didn't just stay dead, he came back to life. And obviously that's where the disagreement parts, where people start, you can either take a side and say, yes, I do believe that, and that would put you in the camp of a Christian, or you can say, no, I don't buy into that. But either way, and this is maybe just my own bias coming in as a Christian, I believe that if God was going to reveal himself to the world, if there was ever going to be a physical representation of God on this planet, the most likely option is Jesus. And if you look at Jesus' effect on all of history, the entire world hinges, if you look at the timeline, it hinges around his coming and his death. And that he basically had a small group of followers and he told them to spread his message to the ends of the earth. And to this day, Christians are the biggest religion, the biggest group of people, and they are in literally the ends of the earth. It's something like 2.3 billion Christians right now on this planet. From a random guy 2,000 years ago who was killed by the Romans. Now, in a couple weeks, we're actually going to look at that question. We're going to say, the question in a couple weeks on February 10th is Jesus really God? And so I don't want to get too into that. Come back on that week if that's a big stumbling block for you. If you can't move from, I can believe in a God, but not sure about the Christian God, come back on that week and we'll talk about it more in depth. But I promise you, I really believe that if you are in that camp, that it is not as big of a jump as you might think. And that if you step into that belief, if you start to put your faith, and if that's too Christian-y of a word, you can just think about it as trust or your confidence in the person of Jesus. If you look into it, if you see the historical basis for his death and his resurrection, I believe that you will experience joy and love and community and deep, deep meaning and purpose in a way that you've never experienced in your entire life. Now, I understand you probably have lots of objections, lots of questions, so I encourage you to text them in. Send them in, and we're going to talk about them in just a second. I'm going to invite the band up onto the stage. There's a song that I recently heard, and maybe if you're like in the Christian song subculture, you're like, how have you just heard this? This has been around for a while. I know, it took me a little while. I listened to the first 10 seconds, I was like, this is kind of boring. And then I went back and listened a year later, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is saying everything that I've been trying to say, but probably 100% more elegantly than I could have ever put it. So the band's going to sing this song. I encourage you to sit in your seats, read along with the lyrics, and then we're going to come back up to answer some questions. Let me close this in prayer really quick. Heavenly Father, I thank you I thank you for everything that you have revealed to us through your creation. That you, as a creator, didn't just create everything and then leave us on our own, but that you cared for us. That you sent Jesus to this planet as your representative to basically make a way for us to be reconciled to you, to be able to come back into a relationship with you. That, Lord, without you, without what Jesus did, we would be lost. We would be wandering all over the world looking for purpose, for meaning, and not finding it. Lord, we thank you that through Jesus, what he did for us, that we can be reconciled with you, that we can find our deep meaning and purpose, that we can love each other as members of God's family, and that we can love the world just as Jesus first loved us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, the band's going to take it away. All right, so we're going to try to answer some of these questions. We're going to see how many we can get through in the next 10 minutes or so. And if we don't get to your question, feel free to come up, talk with Heather and I after. All right, first question. In your sermon, you helped explain why God could exist, but in your own life, how do you know that he's real? Let me say a quick thing, and then I want to hear your answer as well, Heather. I would say I know mostly in my own life the reason that I believe God has existed and still exists is because I've seen him change people in my life dramatically. The people who I never would have thought have turned their lives around have completely become different people because of their belief in God. And I'll give you just one side story too. This is another more tangible thing. There was a period of time in my life where I didn't really think that prayer did much, and I was really feeling down, and I was like, I don't really feel like prayer does anything. And I was like, okay, God, and I was praying by myself, and I'm like, all right, God, if you really want me to pray, give me some sort of sign that prayer actually works, that prayer does something. And so I'm sitting there and I'm praying, and then I hear this name pop up in my head, and this name pops up, and it's Hezekiah. And I'm like, ooh, maybe God's telling me to go to a book of the Bible. So I flip open to the table of contents, looking for the book of Hezekiah. There's no book of Hezekiah. And I'm like, great, there's nothing. It's pointless. Prayer doesn't work. Nothing matters. So then 6 months later, I'm going through a Bible reading plan, and I get to this random part in the Bible, and this guy comes in, and his name's Hezekiah. And the whole point of the Hezekiah story is that he's about to die, and this prophet comes and tells him and says, hey, God says you're about to die. Get your things in order. And prophets back then, if they gave a word that was not from God, then they would actually be struck down. And so he gives him this word. He says, you're going to die. Get your things together. And then Hezekiah turns and he prays and he says, God, let me not die. Let me actually live longer. And then the prophet is walking out and then he stops halfway and he's like, I just heard a word from the Lord. He comes back in and he says, hey, actually, God has heard your prayer. You're going to live for 15 more years. And so I'm sitting there praying, and I ask God for this picture of how I can know that prayer actually works, that he's responding. I get a name that I've never heard of in a book of the Bible that I had never read. And if I had just gone one step further in that moment to look up, is there a Hezekiah in the Bible? I would have seen the message loud and clear that he's saying, yes, prayer works. And so that's just my short answer. Heather, what have you got?
Yeah, I've lived 22 years where I didn't know God. And so seeing the way that my life has changed to me is proof. And I would hope that some of my friends here would know that there's things that have changed in me as well. And the Bible talks a lot about desire. So for me, it was my desires changed. I was big partier, really greedy, angry, anxious, all of the bad things in the world, this girl. And just seeing, I like to say I casually dated God for a year. And so I kind of was just I'll give you a little here, show me what you're about. And things just started changing. And the Bible talks a lot about fruit of the Spirit. So that if you are a Christ follower, there's fruit in your life. There are things that are good in your life. So love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and there's a few others. And I would, me being on the stage is proof, because I would not have wanted to hang out with you weirdo Christians. You're so smiley and bizarre, and no. So, but I would also say to that point too is, a few weeks ago, I was having a really difficult time at work with a coworker, and I was like, God, just show me where you, help me. And I felt read 1 Peter, which is a book of the Bible, and I was like, great. And I get in there, and it's people will be mean to you. And I was like, oh, yes, thank you. You're so sweet. And I was like, yeah, love them. And I was like, oh, okay. So God is super sassy with me too, and that's how I know he's real in my life, is he's kind and gentle and loving. But he also will set me straight and show me that this world, it will be tough, but love them anyways. And I would never want to do that on my own. That is not something that I'd ever want to do. So, yeah.
That's great. All right, next question. Does Park believe in young Earth beliefs, 10,000 years old versus 4.5 billion years? If you have looked on our statement of faith on our website, you will not find a stated belief in terms of the age of the earth, whether or not Genesis is actually 7 literal days or long periods of time or just a metaphor in general. And if you did a little summary of all the Park pastors across all the locations, you would probably get a wide range of answers. There's this idea of there's certain things that you write in pencil, there's certain things you write in pen, and then there's certain things that you would write in blood. The things in blood are like the things that we don't disagree across all of Park. That's like that we believe that Jesus was real and that he died and he came back to life. That's kind of like Christianity 101. But then you start getting down into the pen issues, which is like things like church leadership structures and things like that we would take a stance on. And then you get down to the final one, which is like pencil issues, which is like really, because you can't know one way or another, this is not something that we're going to build like our whole belief on. So really it depends on who you ask at Park. There are pastors who hold both sides in this even just circle of pastors across the locations. So there's not like a single Park, this is what we believe, this is what we don't believe. Next question. I believe the God or some creator exists and it creates everything including the universe and the Big Bang. In Christianity, Jesus Christ is God. So did Jesus Christ create the universe and everything in it? What do you think, Heather?
Thank you.
Kick that over to you.
Yeah, I was
right?
actually just reading about this today in the book of Colossians, which is in the Bible, and it talks about how Jesus was involved in everything of creation, from earth and heaven. So yeah, I would absolutely say that.
Yeah, there's that whole idea of the Trinity, that basically God is 3 persons in one, and it's like this crazy mix of like a diversity and unity, that it's one God expressed in 3 persons. And so I think, yeah, in that sense for sure that Jesus was active in all of creation. All right, next one. What is the point of general revelation, i.e. the cosmological argument, if someone cannot be saved without believing in the name and work of Jesus? Okay, so there is a lot underneath this question. Some of it we'll talk about in the future weeks. But essentially, the biblical picture is that people know deep down that when they see that something created it. Now that's kind of what I was saying in my sermon, that it's like the creation itself reveals a creator. Now the second part of it is a very loaded question for a ton of different reasons. If someone cannot be saved without believing in the name and work of Jesus, we do believe that as Christians, you can only be saved through Jesus, because Jesus is what reconciles us with the God who actually created us. Now, there's a lot that can go into that, because you can bring in all sorts of different answers behind that, but that's essentially the answer in a nutshell, hopefully. Next one. What should our response be when someone has already made up their minds that there's no God? No matter what I say, no matter how great my argument, it doesn't change their opinion. Should we keep pushing? When do we give up and hope we planted the seed? Heather, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I love that question. So planting the seed, again, the Bible talks a lot about fruits and harvest and seed, so very agriculture minded, because that's something that anybody could kind of formulate in their brain. So I would say, what should be your response when someone's already made up their mind? I don't know of anyone who became a Christian through an argument. I think your story is important and no one can argue that. And so let your life be something that shows that God exists and that God has changed your life. And I think we all know Christians that are just stonewalled their way or the highway. Like, they don't even want to hear you out. And I would just encourage all of us, wherever we are, to listen to others and hear their perspectives, because I think it can be a good opportunity as Christians to hear an argument and to say, do I actually believe the things that I can just spew out? Have I actually thought through that? But I would say prayer. I would say to really pray for someone if you are having conversations, and pray for them to get to know God. Pray for your conversations with them, that you would have the words. And maybe talk to other Christians as well. How would you handle that? But I would certainly say an argument is probably just not the route. Personally, tell me about God before I knew God. Argument was not going to work, and I probably would just think you're a lunatic. So I would just say, yeah, be really prayerful and be really kind and really gentle, and just meet people where they are, and God will be the one who brings someone to know him. You will not. So just remember that you have a limited amount of power, but as Christians, we believe God has all the power and authority. So just trust him with that.
For sure, it's great. Next question. Do you think that science proves more of God's complexity than challenges his existence? I would say yes. I would say that's basically what I was trying to say over the last 30 or so minutes. I think when you see the complexity, in my opinion, and remember, I could be biased because I already am a Christian, but I believe that the complexity points to the Creator. And you see a lot of it too, just like there's all sorts of crazy stuff out there. Like I was talking with my friend Miles, he's back there, he's a real mathy guy, and he was telling me about how the Fibonacci sequence is like represented in all these different parts of like nature, and you find it everywhere, and it's just like this weird mathematical thing. Maybe it wasn't you, not you. Miles is saying, no, it was not him. It was someone else. It might have been Dominic Fitzgerald. It was Dominic, probably, okay. They're both very good at math, good at programming, smart guys. So I'd say yes. Next question. From tracing the lineage of Jesus, it seems impossible to reconcile how long humans have existed to what science says. Is there a way to interpret the Bible which is consistent with human skeletons that have been found from millions of years ago? This sort of goes back to the other thing I was talking about in terms of people having different beliefs and different ideas of how to answer that question. There are plenty of strong believing Christians. One of the ones you've probably heard of is C.S. Lewis. He's a famous Christian, and like a lot of us have probably read his books. He was full-blown theistic evolution, which believes that he thinks it was all evolution, that basically, and the earth is millions of years old, and basically adheres to all the things of science, but believes that God was the one guiding that process. Now, whether you think that's convincing as a Christian or not, that's totally up to you. I would say just do the research, look into it, and then see where you land. And one thing that we often do is we look at the scriptures in the Bible and we interpret them by a modern standpoint. And they're not written by scientists. Science wasn't even a thing until like the last 400 years. So there's different things in the genre that you can't just look at any random page of scripture without considering what was the genre, what was the purpose for its writing. So like I would say look into the research and then make your opinion from that. Let's do one more. How do we explain the love of a good father to a person who's experienced the hate of a bad father? Heather, take us away. Isn't that a good one, right? I give her all like the deep emotional ones because I'm a robot.
Well, I'm like a little, whoever wrote this, hopefully they don't know my relation with my dad. I actually have daddy issues. My dad is a alcoholic and a great person, but obviously his alcoholism has affected my life and my family. And so I definitely have had to wrestle with that and think my brain can only think of a father that I've seen, right? And that I've experienced. And so it takes time sometimes, right? To really explore that. And so I think prayer again, that God would show you that he is different and we're all humans. And so a good father is going to mess up just as much as a bad earthly father, and that God would want to heal that hurt. And so I would just go to God about it, ask him to show you that, ask him to prove to you that he is good and that, that he isn't like your earthly father. But I'm sorry for those of us who have hard parent relationships, but trusting in God and trusting that, for me, it's like praying for my dad and trusting that God could do something in my dad as well as he's done for me is something that's been really therapeutic. But I wasn't there day one or day two or like day 1,000. So just would say, like, don't feel like you have to come to God and be like, okay, we're in this thing. Like, bring all of those to him and let God really work that through in your life.
Cool. Well, if we did not answer your question, feel free to come down. Heather and I will be right here, but I'm going to turn it over to Annie.
Thanks, guys. Those were some pretty hardball questions. I would know because I asked one of them. So we really appreciate you guys just sharing, honest and vulnerable answers. But yeah, if you would like prayer for anything at all, we will have deacons and prayer partners up front right after the service. Just really encourage you to have someone pray over you. It's a great feeling. And also, if you consider Near North to be your home, we would love if you would consider supporting us financially. This is something that all followers of Christ are called to do at whatever church they're a part of. So giving is the only way that this church continues to exist throughout the city. The easiest way to give is through the Park app or by texting Park Give to 62953. But if you would like to give physically, Taylor will be in the back over there, and you can give to him as well. And then tonight, in just a few minutes,